The morning sun hadn't yet broken through the thick clouds over the military training ground when Maria first laid eyes on the Apache helicopter. She stood at just 5 feet 4 inches tall, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, watching the massive war machine being prepped for the day's exercises. The male pilots around her whispered and smirked, their conversations peppered with doubt about whether a woman could handle such a powerful aircraft. Maria had heard it all before. Since joining the military at 19, she'd faced constant skepticism. Her instructors questioned her physical strength. Her fellow trainees doubted her mental toughness. Even her own family had expressed concerns when she announced her intention to become a combat pilot. But Maria carried a fire inside her that no amount of doubt could extinguish. She grew up in a small farming village where expectations for women were simple and traditional. Her mother wanted her to marry young, have children, and tend to a household. Her father, though more supportive, still couldn't hide his surprise when Maria announced she wanted to join the military. The village elders shook their heads, predicting she would return home within months, defeated by the harsh realities of military life. But Maria had always been different. As a child, she climbed higher trees than the boys. She ran faster, pushed harder, and refused to accept limitations based on her gender. When she turned 18, she walked into the recruitment office with determination blazing in her eyes. The recruiter, a grizzled veteran with 30 years of service, tried to steer her toward administrative roles or medical training. Maria looked him straight in the eye and said she wanted combat training. The first months of basic training nearly broke her. The physical demands were crushing. 5 a.m. wake-up calls followed by 10-mile runs with full packs. Obstacle courses designed to push even the strongest recruits to their limits. Hand-to-hand combat training where she often found herself outmatched by larger, stronger opponents. But Maria discovered something important during those grueling weeks. While she might not have the raw physical power of her male counterparts, she possessed something equally valuable, an unwavering determination and a sharp tactical mind. Her instructors began to notice. Where other recruits complained about the workload, Maria simply put her head down and did the work. When others struggled with complex military strategy, Maria absorbed information like a sponge, often staying up late into the night studying tactical manuals and historical battles. She learned to use her smaller size as an advantage, developing techniques in combat training that relied on speed and precision rather than brute force. By the time basic training ended, Maria had earned grudging respect from many of her fellow soldiers. She graduated in the top 10% of her class, qualifying for advanced combat training. That's when she first encountered the Apache helicopter program. The Apache was known as one of the most sophisticated and deadly attack helicopters in the world. It required exceptional hand-eye coordination, split-second decision-making abilities, and the mental capacity to process multiple streams of information simultaneously. Most pilots washed out of Apache training. The demands were simply too intense. Flying the helicopter was like conducting an orchestra while playing chess and running a marathon all at the same time. The pilot had to manage the aircraft's complex weapon systems, navigate through hostile territory, communicate with ground forces, and make life-or-death decisions in milliseconds. And all of this while potentially being shot at by enemy forces. Maria's application to the Apache program was initially rejected. The selection board cited concerns about whether she could handle the physical demands of piloting such a powerful aircraft for extended periods. Apache missions could last hours, requiring intense concentration and physical endurance. The official rejection letter suggested she consider transport helicopters instead, describing them as more suitable for female pilots. That rejection letter became fuel for Maria's determination. She requested a meeting with the program director, a stern colonel named who had 25 years of combat experience. Colonel agreed to see her, though his expression made it clear he expected the meeting to be brief and unproductive. Maria walked into his office with a folder containing her training scores, instructor evaluations, and a detailed presentation on why gender should not disqualify a pilot from Apache training. She spoke for 20 minutes, addressing every concern the selection board had raised. She presented data on female pilots from other countries who had successfully flown combat aircraft. She explained how her smaller size actually provided advantages in the cramped Apache cockpit. She detailed her superior scores in simulation training and her exceptional performance in high-pressure scenarios. Colonel listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When Maria finished her presentation, Colonel sat silent for a long moment. Then he asked her a single question that would change her life. He wanted to know if she understood that Apache pilots didn't just fly helicopters. They were weapons of war, required to engage enemy forces directly, to make decisions that would result in enemy deaths, to potentially witness horrific violence up close. Could she handle that reality? Maria didn't hesitate. She told the colonel that she understood war wasn't a game. She had studied military history extensively. She knew that combat meant destruction and death. But she also believed that well-trained, skilled pilots could save friendly lives and protect innocent civilians. Her goal wasn't glory or proving a point about gender equality. Her goal was to serve her country effectively, and she believed she could do that better in an Apache cockpit than anywhere else. Colonel studied her face for what felt like an eternity. Then he told her he would give her one chance. She would enter Apache training on a probationary basis. Any failure, any mistake that wouldn't be tolerated in a male candidate would result in immediate dismissal. There would be no second chances, no allowances made for her gender. She would be held to the exact same standards as every male pilot, perhaps even higher standards given the attention her presence would attract. Maria accepted these terms without complaint. She knew the system was unfair, that she would have to work twice as hard to achieve the same recognition as her male peers. But she also knew that complaining would only reinforce the stereotypes she was trying to overcome. So she simply thanked the colonel for the opportunity and promised she wouldn't waste it. Apache training began the following Monday. Maria reported to the flight school at dawn, finding herself the only woman among 32 pilots. The other trainees ranged from cocky young hotshots fresh from flight school to experienced pilots transitioning from other aircraft. They all had one thing in common. They viewed Maria with varying degrees of skepticism. The lead instructor, a battle-hardened pilot named Captain, made his position clear on the first day. He announced that he didn't care about gender, race, religion, or background. He cared only about one thing: whether a pilot could handle the Apache under combat conditions. Anyone who couldn't meet his standards would be removed from the program, no exceptions. His eyes lingered on Maria when he said this, making his meaning abundantly clear. The first weeks focused on understanding the Apache systems. The helicopter was a technological marvel, packed with advanced avionics, weapons systems, and defensive countermeasures. Pilots had to master the aircraft's complex controls, learn to interpret data from multiple sensors simultaneously, and develop the mental stamina to process information at incredible speeds. Maria threw herself into the training with single-minded focus. While other trainees spent evenings socializing or relaxing, she studied. She memorized every system, every procedure, every emergency protocol. She spent hours in the simulator, practicing until her responses became automatic. When she struggled with certain maneuvers, she requested additional training time, working with instructors one-on-one to overcome her weaknesses. Her dedication began to show results. In simulator exercises, Maria consistently scored among the top pilots. Her reaction times were exceptional, her decision-making sound, her weapons accuracy remarkable. She had a natural feel for the Apache's controls, flying the complex helicopter with a grace that surprised even Captain. During one particularly difficult simulation involving a nighttime rescue operation under heavy fire, Maria successfully completed the mission when 3 other pilots had failed. But simulator success was only the beginning. Real flight training brought new challenges. The Apache was a beast of a machine, powerful and unforgiving of mistakes. Maria's first actual flight in the pilot's seat came 3 months into training. Captain sat in the gunner's position behind her, ready to take control if necessary. As Maria lifted the Apache off the ground for the first time, she felt the raw power of the aircraft vibrating through her body. Flying the Apache was like nothing she had ever experienced. The helicopter responded to her slightest input, climbing, banking, and maneuvering with incredible agility despite its size. The heads-up display provided a constant stream of information that she had to process while maintaining situational awareness of her surroundings. It was overwhelming and exhilarating in equal measure. Captain put her through a series of basic maneuvers, straight and level flight turns, climbs, descents. Maria handled each one competently, her training and study paying off, then ordered her to perform a combat maneuver called a break turn, a sharp, aggressive banking maneuver used to evade enemy fire. Maria hesitated for just a second, then threw the Apache into a hard left bank. The G-forces pushed her into her seat as the helicopter pivoted sharply. She completed the maneuver smoothly, leveling out exactly where had. For the first time since training began, Maria heard something unexpected over the intercom. Captain's grunt of approval. It wasn't praise, exactly, but coming from the stern instructor, it meant everything. That small acknowledgement told Maria she was on the right path. As weeks turned into months, Maria's skills continued to develop. She mastered weapon systems, learning to engage targets with the Apache's devastating 30 chain gun and precision Hellfire missiles. She practiced terrain-following flight, skimming just meters above the ground at high speeds to avoid enemy radar. She trained in formation flying, coordinating with other Apache pilots to execute complex attack patterns. But technical skill was only part of Apache training. The instructors also evaluated pilots on their judgment, their ability to remain calm under pressure, and their willingness to make difficult decisions quickly. They ran the trainees through increasingly complex scenarios designed to test not just flying ability, but combat readiness. One exercise particularly tested Maria's resolve. The scenario involved a ground unit pinned down by enemy forces. As the pilot, Maria had to assess the tactical situation, identify enemy positions, and engage targets while avoiding friendly casualties. The simulation included civilians in the area, adding another layer of complexity. Maria had to decide which targets posed the greatest threat, when to engage, and when to hold fire. She approached the scenario methodically, analyzing the battlefield from multiple angles before committing to an attack run. She identified 3 enemy positions threatening the friendly forces, prioritized them based on threat level, and planned her approach to minimize exposure to enemy fire. Then she executed her attack with precision, eliminating the enemy positions while keeping the Apache out of range of their weapons. What impressed the instructors most wasn't just her successful completion of the mission. It was her decision to hold fire on one suspected enemy position because she couldn't confirm whether civilians were present. In the heat of simulated combat, with friendly forces under fire, Maria had maintained the discipline to follow rules of engagement even when it would have been easier to simply destroy everything that might pose a threat. That exercise became a turning point in how the other trainees viewed Maria. Word spread about her performance, about her technical skills and her tactical judgment. The whispers and smirks began to fade, replaced by a grudging respect. Some of the male pilots even started approaching her for advice on particular maneuvers or tactics. But not everyone was ready to accept her. A pilot named, who came from a long line of military aviators, remained openly hostile. He made snide comments about women in combat, suggested that Maria was receiving special treatment, and complained loudly that standards were being lowered to accommodate female pilots. His attitude poisoned the atmosphere, creating tension within the training unit. The situation came to a head during a formation flying exercise. Maria and were paired together, required to coordinate their Apache helicopters through a series of tactical maneuvers. The exercise demanded precise communication and mutual trust. From the start, made his contempt clear, responding to Maria's radio calls with barely concealed disdain. As they executed a coordinated attack pattern, suddenly broke formation without warning, forcing Maria to take immediate evasive action to avoid a collision. The maneuver was dangerous and completely unnecessary, clearly intended to rattle Maria or make her look incompetent. In the control room, Captain and the other instructors watched the displays with growing anger. Maria could have responded with anger or reported dangerous behavior. Instead, she calmly corrected her position, radioed to confirm his intentions, and completed the exercise professionally despite his lack of cooperation. Her composure under pressure impressed the instructors far more than any perfect training run could have. After the flight, Captain called both pilots to his office. What happened in that meeting remained private, but afterward, his attitude changed dramatically. He stopped making disparaging comments and began treating Maria with professional courtesy. Some trainees speculated that had threatened to wash out of the program. Others believed the captain had simply made it clear that unprofessional behavior wouldn't be tolerated regardless of the reason behind it. Training intensified as the pilots approached the final phase of the program. They began flying actual combat simulations with live ammunition, engaging practice targets on designated ranges. The transition from simulator to real weapons was significant. Pulling the trigger and watching a missile streak toward a target, feeling the Apache shudder as the chain gun fired, these experiences brought home the reality of what they were training to do. Maria found herself surprisingly untroubled by this aspect of training. She had spent considerable time thinking about the moral dimensions of combat, about what it would mean to engage enemy forces. She had concluded that in a world where conflicts existed, skilled and ethical warriors were necessary. Her goal was to be precise, to minimize unnecessary destruction, and to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The final examination came after 9 months of intensive training. Each pilot had to complete a comprehensive evaluation that tested every skill they had learned. The test included navigation through difficult terrain, engagement of multiple targets under simulated combat conditions, emergency procedures, and coordination with ground forces. It was designed to be completed in 3 hours, but pilots could take up to 4 if needed. Maria approached her final exam with focused intensity. She had prepared for this moment for months, and she was determined to prove that she belonged in the Apache program. As she lifted off for her evaluation flight, she felt a strange calm settle over her. All the doubt, all the pressure, all the challenges she had overcome seemed to fall away. In this moment, it was just her, the Apache, and the mission ahead. The evaluation course took Maria over mountainous terrain, through narrow valleys, and across open plains where she would be exposed to simulated enemy fire. Her first objective appeared on her display: a convoy of enemy vehicles moving through a mountain pass. She needed to identify the convoy, determine which vehicles posed the greatest threat, and engage them while avoiding collateral damage to a nearby village. Maria approached the target area at low altitude, using the terrain to mask her approach. As the convoy came into view, she quickly analyzed the composition: 2 armored personnel carriers, 3 supply trucks, and what appeared to be a mobile air defense system. The air defense unit was her primary concern. If she didn't neutralize it first, it could shoot her down before she could complete her mission. She calculated the angles, confirmed there were no civilians in the immediate area, and initiated her attack. The Hellfire missile left its rail with a distinctive whoosh, streaking toward the air defense vehicle with deadly accuracy. The target exploded in a fireball of simulated destruction. Maria immediately banked the Apache hard right, gaining altitude to reassess the battlefield. The remaining vehicles were scattering, trying to escape the mountain pass. Maria engaged the armored personnel carriers next, knowing they likely contained troops that could threaten friendly forces. 2 more Hellfire missiles found their targets with precision. The supply trucks presented a dilemma. They might contain weapons and ammunition, making them legitimate military targets. But they could also be carrying supplies for civilian populations in occupied territories. The rules of engagement required positive identification before engagement. Maria made the decision to mark the trucks' positions for follow-up intelligence gathering rather than destroy them immediately. It was the kind of judgment call that separated good pilots from great ones. She radioed the positions to her evaluators and moved on to her next objective. The second phase of the evaluation tested her ability to provide close air support to ground forces. A simulated friendly unit was under attack from enemy positions on a. Maria had to identify and neutralize the enemy while ensuring she didn't accidentally target the friendly forces below. The margin for error was razor-thin. She studied the tactical display, correlating it with the visual information coming through her targeting system. The friendly forces were marked with infrared beacons, but in the chaos of combat, Maria knew such identifiers could be unreliable. She confirmed the positions through multiple sources before selecting her targets. Then she unleashed the Apache's 30mm chain gun, walking explosive rounds across the enemy positions with surgical precision. The simulated ground commander radioed his thanks, reporting that the enemy fire had ceased and his unit was advancing. Maria acknowledged and moved on to her next task, aware that time was ticking down on her evaluation. The third phase put her in a scenario every Apache pilot dreaded: a catastrophic system failure during combat operations. Her hydraulic system suddenly registered as failed, making the Apache significantly harder to control. Simultaneously, she received a distress call from a downed pilot behind enemy lines who needed immediate extraction. This scenario had no perfect solution. Maria had to decide whether to abort the mission and return to base with a crippled aircraft, or press on and attempt the rescue despite the risk. She knew the evaluators were watching to see how she handled this impossible choice. After a moment's consideration, she decided to continue the mission. A pilot's life hung in the balance, and she believed she could manage the damaged Apache long enough to provide cover for the rescue. Flying with simulated hydraulic failure was like wrestling a bucking horse while blindfolded. Every control input required 3 times the usual force. The Apache wanted to drift and spin, fighting her attempts to maintain stable flight. Maria's arms burned with effort as she muscled the helicopter toward the downed pilot's position. She found the pilot's beacon and established a perimeter, scanning for enemy forces that might threaten the rescue operation. 2 enemy vehicles appeared on her sensors, moving toward the downed pilot's location. Despite her aircraft's compromised state, Maria engaged them, destroying both vehicles before they could reach the friendly pilot. She maintained her protective orbit until the rescue helicopter arrived, extracted the pilot, and cleared the area. Only then did Maria turn her crippled Apache toward base. The flight back tested every bit of her skill and endurance. Her arms shook with fatigue from maintaining control of the damaged aircraft. Sweat poured down her face despite the cool temperature. But she kept the Apache flying, maintaining discipline and focus even as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. She brought the helicopter in for landing with perfect precision, settling it onto the pad as gently as if nothing had been wrong. As the rotors spun down, Maria finally allowed herself to relax, her muscles trembling with released tension. She had completed her evaluation in 2 hours and 45 minutes, faster than any other pilot in her training class. Captain was waiting when she climbed out of the cockpit. His face betrayed no emotion as he approached, and Maria braced herself for criticism, for some detail she had overlooked or mistake she had made. Instead, the captain extended his hand. When she took it, he said 7 words that made all the months of struggle worthwhile. "You earned your wings today, Lieutenant." Maria graduated from Apache training at the top of her class. She received her combat pilot rating and assignment to an active combat unit. The ceremony was small and professional, with no special recognition of her achievement as the first female Apache pilot in her country's military. That was exactly how Maria wanted it. She hadn't fought this hard to be celebrated as a symbol or a token. She had fought to be recognized as a capable pilot, nothing more and nothing less. Her assignment took her to a forward operating base near the border region, where tensions had been escalating for months. The base housed 4 Apache helicopters and their crews, along with supporting personnel and ground forces. Maria's arrival generated considerable curiosity among the troops stationed there. Most had heard rumors about the female Apache pilot, but seeing her in person was something different. The base commander, Colonel Rains, was a pragmatic officer who cared more about mission readiness than social dynamics. During Maria's initial briefing, he made his expectations clear. She would receive no special treatment, positive or negative. She would fly the same missions, face the same risks, and be held to the same standards as every other pilot under his command. Maria assured him that was exactly what she wanted. Her fellow Apache pilots were professional but cautious in their interactions with her. They had all heard about her training performance, but reputation and combat reality were very different things. Apache pilots formed tight bonds based on mutual trust and respect, knowing their lives depended on each other during combat operations. Maria understood she would have to prove herself all over again in this new environment. The opportunity came sooner than expected. 3 days after Maria's arrival, intelligence reported a large enemy force moving toward a strategically important town. The town's population of several thousand civilians was in danger, and friendly ground forces were too far away to provide immediate protection. Colonel Rains ordered all available Apache to intercept the enemy force and provide air support until ground reinforcements could arrive. Maria suited up alongside 3 male pilots, Captain, Lieutenant Torres, and Lieutenant. They were experienced combat pilots who had flown dozens of missions together. Maria was the unknown factor, and she could see the concern in their eyes as they conducted their pre-flight briefings. They were professional enough not to voice their doubts openly, but the tension was palpable. The 4 Apache lifted off as dawn broke across the landscape. They flew in formation toward the target area, skimming low over the terrain to avoid detection. Captain led the flight, with Maria assigned to fly wing position on his left. It was simultaneously a position of trust and a test. The wing pilot needed to maintain precise formation while remaining ready to engage targets or respond to threats. As they approached the target area, his voice crackled over the radio. Enemy forces had been spotted 5 kilometers from the town, moving faster than intelligence had predicted. The Apache had maybe 15 minutes before the enemy reached the civilian population. Split the flight into 2 pairs, sending Torres and to hit the enemy's left flank while he and Maria would strike from the right. Maria's pulse quickened as she followed into the attack. This was it, real combat, live ammunition. Actual enemy forces that would be shooting back. All her training, all her preparation came down to this moment. Apache dove toward the enemy column, and Maria stayed with him, matching his movements precisely. The enemy force was larger than intelligence had suggested. Maria counted at least 20 armored vehicles, multiple mobile artillery pieces, and what looked like hundreds of infantry soldiers. The two Apache would be heavily outnumbered, but they had the advantage of surprise and superior firepower. Opened fire first, his missiles slamming into the lead vehicles of the column. Maria selected her targets and engaged. Her first Hellfire missile struck an enemy tank, the explosion sending debris flying in all directions. She didn't pause to admire her accuracy. Already she was lining up her next shot, her hands moving across the weapon's controls with practiced efficiency. Another missile launched, another target destroyed. Then the enemy began shooting back. Tracer rounds lit up the sky as anti-aircraft guns opened fire. Maria threw the Apache into evasive maneuvers, the helicopter dancing through the air as she dodged the incoming fire. Her training had prepared her for this, but the reality was far more intense than any simulation. The sound of bullets passing close to the aircraft, the knowledge that one lucky shot could bring her down, it was terrifying and focusing all at once. She continued engaging targets even as she maneuvered, her mind processing multiple streams of information simultaneously. Enemy positions, friendly locations, ammunition status, fuel levels, threats, opportunities. It all flowed through her consciousness as she fought to keep the Apache alive and effective. His voice came over the radio, calm and professional, calling out targets and coordinating their attacks. Tours and were having success on the left flank, but the enemy force was spreading out, trying to disperse and make themselves harder targets. Maria realized they needed to disrupt the enemy's command and control. She scanned the battlefield and identified what looked like a command vehicle, distinguished by its multiple antennas and the cluster of personnel around it. She radioed to inform him of her target selection. He acknowledged and told her to take the shot. Maria lined up the command vehicle in her sights, compensated for distance and movement, and launched her missile. The Hellfire flew true, striking the command vehicle dead center. The explosion was massive, suggesting she had hit something carrying ammunition or fuel in addition to the command staff. The enemy formation began to break up, losing coordination without their command element. Some vehicles tried to advance toward the town. Others retreated. Infantry units scattered, seeking cover. The four Apache pressed their advantage, systematically destroying armored vehicles and artillery pieces while being careful to minimize infantry casualties where possible. The battle lasted 40 minutes, though it felt like hours to Maria. By the time ground reinforcements arrived, the enemy force had been effectively neutralized. The town was safe, its civilian population spared from what would have been a devastating assault. As Maria turned her Apache back toward base, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment mixed with sobering awareness of the destruction she had helped deliver. Back at base, the pilots conducted their post-mission debriefing. They reviewed gun camera footage, discussed tactical decisions, and analyzed what had worked and what could be improved. When they reviewed Maria's engagement of the command vehicle, paused the playback and turned to look at her. Then he nodded once, a gesture of respect and acknowledgement. She had proven herself in combat. That mission was the first of many. Over the following months, Maria flew dozens of combat operations, each one adding to her experience and reputation. She developed a particular talent for precision strikes in complex environments where the margin for error was minimal. Other pilots began requesting her as their wing partner, recognizing her skill and reliability under fire. But war has a way of testing people beyond their limits. 3 months after her first combat mission, Maria faced a situation that would define her military career and cement her place in military history. Intelligence reported a massive enemy armored offensive forming up in a disputed border region. The enemy had assembled a force of over 300 tanks, armored vehicles, and supporting units. They intended to punch through the defense line and seize a major city behind it. Friendly ground forces were positioned to defend, but they were outnumbered and air support would be critical to stopping the offensive. Every available combat aircraft was scrambled to intercept the enemy force. Maria and 3 other Apache pilots were assigned to hit the enemy's right flank, attempting to disrupt their formations before they could organize their attack. As the Apache approached the battlefield, the scale of the enemy force, the 4 Apache split up, each taking a sector of the battlefield. Maria's sector put her directly in the path of a concentrated armor column consisting of at least 80 tanks and supporting vehicles. The enemy had air defense systems interspersed throughout their formation, making close approaches extremely dangerous. Maria would have to stay at maximum engagement range, picking off targets while remaining just outside the effective range of enemy anti-aircraft weapons. She began her attack methodically, selecting priority targets and engaging them with precision. Tank after tank fell to her missiles, each shot carefully aimed to maximize effectiveness. The enemy returned fire, filling the sky with anti-aircraft munitions. Maria kept moving, never staying in one position long enough to become an easy target. Her hands moved constantly across the controls, flying and fighting simultaneously. Then disaster struck. Apache took a direct hit from an enemy surface-to-air missile. Maria watched in horror as his helicopter spun out of control and crashed in enemy territory. There was no parachute, no emergency beacon, was either dead or captured. The loss of their flight leader left the remaining 3 pilots in a precarious position. Took command, his voice tight with grief and anger as he radioed new instructions. They needed to break off the attack and return to base for rearming. They had expended most of their missiles and were running low on fuel. Maria acknowledged the order, but as she turned her Apache away from the battlefield, she saw something that made her hesitate. A gap had opened in the enemy formation where she had been attacking. The concentrated fire she had delivered had created a weak point in their advance. If someone could exploit that gap, hit the enemy from an unexpected angle, it might disrupt their entire offensive. But doing so would require flying deep into enemy territory, exposing oneself to concentrated fire from all directions. It would be a suicide mission for any normal pilot. Maria made a decision that would be debated in military academies for years to come. Instead of following the other Apache back to base, she dove back toward the battlefield. His voice exploded over the radio, demanding to know what she was doing. Maria calmly explained her tactical assessment and her intention to exploit the gap in the enemy formation, ordered her to abort and return to base immediately. Maria ignored the order. In that moment, she calculated that the potential military advantage of disrupting the enemy offensive outweighed the risk to herself and the consequences of disobeying a direct command. It was the kind of decision that could result in a court-martial or a medal, depending on the outcome. She switched her radio to a different frequency to avoid further orders and committed fully to her attack. She came in low and fast, threading through the gap she had created in the enemy formation. Enemy tanks surrounded her on 3 sides, all of them now aware of her presence and turning their weapons toward her. Maria's fingers flew across the weapon's controls, engaging targets as fast as the systems could acquire them. She wasn't trying to destroy the entire force. She was trying to create chaos, to make the enemy focus on her instead of their planned offensive. And it worked. The enemy formation began to lose cohesion as units turned to defend against Maria's attack. Friendly artillery, seeing the disruption Maria had created, began dropping shells into the confused enemy ranks. Other air units, emboldened by Maria's aggressive action, renewed their attacks. What had been an organized enemy offensive began to fragment into isolated pockets of confused defensive units. Maria continued her attack with absolute focus. Her Apache was hit multiple times by small arms fire and shell fragments, but nothing critical was damaged. She was down to her last few missiles and running dangerously low on fuel. Every moment she stayed over the battlefield increased the likelihood she wouldn't make it back to base. But she kept fighting, kept pressing the attack, determined to maximize the impact of her decision. Her final missile destroyed an enemy command vehicle. Her chain gun fell silent as she expended the last of her ammunition. Maria finally turned her damaged Apache toward friendly territory, nursing the helicopter through the sky as enemy fire continued to pursue her. She had been over the battlefield for nearly 2 hours, far longer than normal Apache missions lasted. Her fuel gauge showed red. She might not have enough to reach base. The Apache's low fuel warning began chiming insistently. Maria calculated her options. She could try to reach base and potentially crash when her fuel ran out, or she could set down in friendly territory and call for extraction. She chose to push for base, unwilling to abandon her Apache unless absolutely necessary. The helicopter coughed and sputtered as the last drops of fuel fed into the engine. Maria could see the base ahead, so close yet still too far. The engine quit completely 2 kilometers from base. Maria had just enough altitude and forward momentum to attempt an auto-rotation landing, a dangerous maneuver that involved using the Apache's falling motion to keep the rotors spinning and maintain some control. She had practiced auto-rotation in training, but never performed one in an actual emergency with a combat-damaged aircraft. The Apache fell from the sky in a controlled descent. Maria worked the controls, managing the helicopter's energy and angle of descent. The ground rushed up toward her. At the last possible moment, she pulled back on the collective, using the rotor's remaining energy to cushion the landing. The Apache hit hard, the landing gear collapsing under the impact. The helicopter skidded across the ground for 50 meters before finally coming to rest. Maria sat in the cockpit, stunned but alive. Her hands shook with adrenaline and exhaustion. She had survived. More importantly, her attack had succeeded in disrupting the enemy offensive. The battle was far from over, but the enemy's momentum had been broken. Emergency crews rushed toward the crashed Apache, pulling Maria from the cockpit and checking her for injuries. Miraculously, she was unhurt aside from bruises and minor cuts. Colonel Rains was waiting when Maria arrived at the operations center. His face was unreadable as he ordered her to his office. Maria knew what was coming. She had disobeyed a direct order from her flight commander. No matter how successful her attack had been, military discipline required consequences for such actions. She stood at attention in the colonel's office, prepared to accept whatever punishment he deemed appropriate. The colonel studied her in silence for a long moment. Then he asked her to explain her decision-making process, from the moment she saw the gap in the enemy formation to her decision to disobey order. Maria laid out her tactical reasoning clearly and honestly. She acknowledged that she had violated military discipline, but maintained that her actions had been justified by the military situation. Colonel Rains listened without interrupting. When Maria finished, he told her that her actions would be reviewed by higher command. She was confined to base pending the results of that review. It could go either way, courts-martial or commendation. In the meantime, she was grounded, forbidden from flying any missions. Maria accepted the decision and left the colonel's office uncertain about her future. 3 days later, reconnaissance reports confirmed the extent of Maria's impact on the enemy offensive. Her attack had destroyed or disabled 47 enemy tanks and armored vehicles. More significantly, the disruption she caused had given friendly ground forces time to reinforce their positions and coordinate their defenses. The enemy offensive had been repelled, saving the city and potentially thousands of lives. Military analysts reviewing the battle concluded that Maria's intervention had been a turning point in the engagement. The court-martial never materialized. Instead, Maria received orders to report to National Military Headquarters. She made the journey with considerable anxiety, unsure what awaited her. When she arrived, she found herself in a ceremony attended by high-ranking military officials and government representatives. The official citation praised her exceptional valor, tactical brilliance, and selfless dedication to protecting civilian lives and friendly forces. She was awarded her nation's highest military decoration for valor in combat. The medal came with a promotion to captain and recognition as one of the most accomplished combat pilots in the military's history. The ceremony included detailed accounts of her actions during the battle, with particular emphasis on her destruction of 47 enemy armored vehicles in a single engagement while operating alone and under intense enemy fire. Media coverage of the ceremony was extensive. Maria became a national figure overnight, celebrated as a hero and a symbol of courage. But the attention made her uncomfortable. She had never sought fame or recognition. She had simply done what she believed was necessary to accomplish the mission and protect lives. The notion that her gender made her achievements more noteworthy bothered her. She wanted to be recognized as a skilled pilot, not as a novelty. During interviews following the ceremony, Maria consistently deflected attention from herself and focused on the broader military effort. She praised her fellow pilots, the ground forces who had held their positions under fire, and the support personnel who kept aircraft flying and weapons systems operational. She emphasized that modern warfare was a team effort, and that her individual actions had been possible only because of the larger military infrastructure supporting her. Despite her attempts to minimize her individual role, Maria's story resonated widely. Young women across the country saw in her proof that gender need not limit one's aspirations or achievements. Military academies reported increased applications from female candidates interested in combat roles. Maria received thousands of letters from people thanking her for her service and expressing inspiration from her example. The military, recognizing the value of her experience, assigned Maria to train the next generation of Apache pilots. She spent the following year developing new tactical doctrines based on lessons learned from her combat experiences. She also worked to make the Apache program more accessible to qualified female pilots, not by lowering standards, but by removing artificial barriers and biases from the selection and training process. Under Maria's influence, the Apache program saw its first group of female trainees graduate together. She mentored them personally, passing on not just technical knowledge, but also the mental toughness and confidence needed to succeed in a male-dominated field. She told them that they would face doubt and skepticism, but that excellence was the best response to discrimination. Prove yourself through action, she advised, and let your performance speak louder than any words. Maria eventually returned to active combat duty, flying missions in several different theaters of operation over the next 5 years. She accumulated over 800 combat flight hours and participated in dozens of major operations. Her tactics and techniques were studied in military schools, and she became a sought-after instructor and consultant on attack helicopter operations. But her most significant contribution wasn't military victories or tactical innovations. It was the door she opened for others. By proving that a woman could not only fly the Apache but excel in the most demanding combat situations, Maria changed the conversation about women in military aviation. She demonstrated that the question wasn't whether women could handle complex, dangerous combat roles, but whether the military could handle having women in those roles. The answer, as Maria's career made clear, was yes. Within a decade of her awards ceremony, female Apache pilots were no longer considered unusual. They served alongside male pilots in combat units around the world, their presence accepted as normal rather than noteworthy. Maria's achievement had been to make what seemed impossible become ordinary. Years later, after retiring from active duty as a lieutenant colonel, Maria was asked in an interview what she considered her greatest accomplishment. The interviewer expected her to mention the battle where she destroyed 47 enemy tanks, or her role in developing modern attack helicopter tactics, or her decorations and awards. Instead, Maria said her greatest accomplishment was proving that determination and skill mattered more than gender. She reflected on her journey from that small farming village where expectations for women were so limited to becoming one of the most decorated combat pilots in her nation's history. She thought about all the young women who had followed the path she had blazed, pursuing careers in aviation and military service without facing the same level of skepticism and doubt she had encountered. That, Maria believed, was worth more than any medal or recognition. The title of that old prejudice, that women couldn't handle Apache, had been thoroughly demolished. Maria had taken on 47 enemy tanks alone and emerged victorious. But her real victory was far more significant than any single battle. She had proven that courage, skill, and determination knew no gender. She had shown that the only real limits are the ones we place on ourselves and each other. Her story became part of military history, taught in academies and discussed in strategy courses. But more importantly, it became part of cultural history, a reminder that progress often comes from individuals willing to challenge assumptions and prove that what everyone knows to be impossible is actually quite achievable with enough determination and skill. Maria's legacy lived on in the countless female pilots who followed her path, in the tactical doctrines she helped develop, and in the changed attitudes about women in combat that her career helped foster. She had wanted only to serve her country and fly helicopters. In doing so, she had changed her military and inspired a generation. The woman they said couldn't handle an Apache had not only handled it, she had mastered it in ways that few pilots of any gender ever achieved. Today, when people discuss great combat pilots, Maria's name appears alongside the legends, not as a footnote about being the first woman to do something, but as one of the best pilots her generation produced. That, ultimately, was exactly what she had fought for all along. Not special recognition for being a woman in a man's world, but equal recognition for being a skilled professional in a demanding field. She had earned that recognition through determination, talent, and an unwavering refusal to accept other people's limitations as her own. The Apache helicopter that Maria flew to such great effect during that historic battle was eventually retired and placed in a military museum. Visitors can see the bullet holes and damage from enemy fire, physical evidence of the desperate battle where one pilot took on overwhelming odds and changed the course of a conflict. Next to the aircraft is a plaque describing the battle and Maria's role in it. The plaque concludes with a quote from Maria herself, words she spoke during an interview years after the events. People asked if I was scared flying alone against so many enemy tanks. Of course I was scared. Fear is natural, but I had a job to do, people to protect, and the training to do it well. So I focused on the mission and trusted in my abilities. That's all any pilot can do, regardless of gender. Those words captured the essence of Maria's approach to both her military career and life in general. She never challenges or pretended that breaking barriers was easy. She simply refused to let fear or doubt prevent her from pursuing her goals. She acknowledged obstacles while refusing to be stopped by them. She was scared, so she focused on the work. She faced discrimination, so she let her performance speak for itself. She encountered skepticism, so she proved the skeptics wrong through action rather than argument. In the end, Maria's story wasn't really about helicopters or tanks or military tactics, though those elements were certainly part of it. Her story was about human potential and the artificial limits that society sometimes places on people based on characteristics that have nothing to do with ability. She had been told, implicitly and explicitly, that women couldn't handle the Apache helicopter and the demands of combat aviation. She had proven that assessment wrong in the most dramatic way possible, not just by succeeding, but by excelling at the highest levels of her profession. The question posed by the title, whether women could handle Apache, had been answered definitively. They could, they did, and they would continue to do so. Maria had made sure of that. Her 47 enemy tanks destroyed in a single engagement made for a dramatic headline, but her real achievement was far more significant and lasting. She had changed minds, opened doors, and paved the way for everyone who came after her. That was the victory that truly mattered, the one that would endure long after individual battles were forgotten. Maria lived to see the day when female Apache pilots were so common that nobody thought to comment on it anymore. Young women joined the military and entered flight training with the same opportunities as their male counterparts, facing judgment based on their abilities rather than their gender. They still had to prove themselves, of course. Aviation demands excellence from everyone regardless of background. But they didn't have to overcome the additional burden of widespread doubt about whether someone of their gender could possibly succeed. Maria had lifted that burden by carrying it herself and proving it groundless. In her later years, Maria occasionally visited military bases to speak with pilots and share her experiences. She always emphasized the same themes: preparation, professionalism, perseverance. She told young pilots that talent and skill were developed through relentless practice and dedication. She warned them that combat was terrifying and chaotic, but thorough training could provide a foundation of competence to rely on when fear threatened to overwhelm. She encouraged them to support each other, to build teams based on mutual respect and shared commitment to excellence. When she passed away at the age of 72, Maria was remembered by military leaders, fellow pilots, and a grateful nation. Her funeral included full military honors, with a formation of Apache helicopters performing a missing man flyover. Tributes poured in from around the world, recognizing her contributions to military aviation and her role in advancing equality in combat roles. But perhaps the most fitting tribute came from the young female Apache pilot who led the flyover formation. She had never met Maria personally, but had grown up hearing stories about the legendary pilot who took on 47 enemy tanks alone. That pilot, like hundreds of others, had chosen aviation as a career because Maria had proven it was possible. She flew that day not just to honor a fallen hero, but to represent the living legacy of someone who had changed what was possible for an entire generation. That was Maria's true victory, not 47 tanks destroyed, impressive as that feat was, not medals or promotions or recognition, though she earned all of those. Her real victory was in the doors she opened, the barriers she broke, and the possibilities she created for everyone who came after. She had been told women couldn't handle Apache. She had responded by becoming one of the best Apache pilots in history, and in doing so, she had ensured that future generations would never face that same doubt. That was an achievement far more important than any single battle, and it would endure far longer than any military campaign apparent. The horizon was filled with armored vehicles, a steel tide rolling forward with seemingly unstoppable momentum. Maria felt a moment of doubt. How could 4 helicopters possibly make a difference against such overwhelming numbers? Then she pushed the doubt aside and focused on her mission.